Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today what we got is a 2008 Harley Road Glide. This motor has been making some noises. That's making like a little screeching, whittling noise from the cylinders. So we're suspecting a seized piston in here. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take it apart and see what's making the noise. Stay tuned. Got to remove the tank. On the left-hand side of the bike, you got the fuel line coupling here. You just press up on the top collar, wiggle and pull that out. That's how you disconnect the fuel line. On this model, there's no crossover, so now that we got the bolts out, we could go ahead and lift the tank off the bike. So one way to check to see if your motor has some major issues is to pull out this crank sensor. It's on the front of the motor on the left hand side. This sensor is actually like a magnet, so if you pull it out and you see a bunch of metal shavings on it, that means you got some bearing failures or rod failures, something going on inside the motor. So we're going to go ahead and pull this sensor out and see what it looks like. Just take a 3/16 Allen, take that bolt out, or technically a screw. Take out the screw. What you're going to do is you're just going to kind of break the seal on the sensor. It just has a little O-ring on it. So you could do that by wiggling it, and then while you wiggle, pull out. So the sensor doesn't have too much. It does have a little bit of metal here, but real bad issues will have like a big afro on here. Got to remove the footboard, remove the pipe. Okay, now we're ready to start taking off the top end. We got the pipe off, got the tank off. Got to start pulling some of these brackets. But the first thing to do is go ahead and pull out the spark plugs, get a jack under the bike so that the rear wheel can spin. What we need to do is we need to put this thing in high gear so that we could rotate the motor to get to top dead center. So there we are, we're in 6th gear. Got a little scissor jack with the block under here going across the cross member of the frame. Bike's nice and secure. Gonna go ahead and remove the spark plugs. So you remove the spark plug so that it's easier to rotate the motor by turning the rear wheel. This lets the compression out so you can rotate it, because you don't want to just start unbolting the valve train while it's all loaded up under the spring pressure of the valve springs. So you get it on top dead center on whatever cylinder you're taking it apart. All right, move some of these brackets. Be careful not to break any of these little plastic clips. Keep a track of what spark plug goes where. Move the coil. That. Get some room for the rocker boxes. Two bolts here. Uses 9/16 socket. Take the horn bracket off. Thanks for stopping by and checking out the channel. Go ahead and hit a like, subscribe. Maybe drop a comment on what you think might be causing the noise on this motor. I didn't fire it up because I didn't want to get the pipe hot and the oil. The thing's been sitting overnight, so the oil all drained to the bottom, just so it makes less mess. But it's making like a squeaking sound from the top end, specifically from the cylinders. So in my experience, that's a piston starting to seize. So that's what we're going after here. I pulled the crank sensor out. There wasn't an abnormal amount of metal on there. Again, if you pull out the crank sensor, it's a magnet on the front of the motor on the left-hand side. If you pull it out and it's got, you know, big old puffy bunch of metal shavings, most likely you got a rod bearing went out or a lifter went out, something like that. Okay, now that we got the horn mount removed, we could remove the head temp sensors. You just pull back this little boot right here, take the connector off, and then we're going to go ahead and pull that sensor out. Deep 3/4 inch socket. Don't back it off too far. You won't be able to get your ratchet out. Just enough to crack it loose and then back it out by hand. Back on the right hand side of the bike, we got to remove the air cleaner. Every bike's going to be a little different depending on, you know, the configuration or whatever accessories you got on here, the pipe, the air cleaner. So we're just going to go ahead and get this removed. This Roland Sands air cleaner has 5 quarter 20 screws that hold on the filter element. It just uses a 3/16 Allen. Go ahead and get these backed off, removed, so we can get the backing plate bolts off. The 2 breather bolts are what hold the induction module to the head with the flange and intake flanges. All right, you gotta have some spacers here. What I'll do is I'll just crack these loose so we can get the spacers out. Don't forget to tighten them up. So, just so I don't forget, I'm going to just remove them. Because if you take them all the way out, you can't forget to tighten them. You know, technically, I guess you could. All right, there we go. And we got some connectors up here. You got your ACRs, your compression releases. You got your injectors. Got your T-map sensor. Your intake air temperature and mass airflow. Not flow, but pressure. All right, then we got also our actuator, electronic throttle actuator connector. Just got a little tab. All of our connectors disconnected. So on this model, it's got a front motor mount here, some 9/16. I'm calling these bolts, you know, by the size of the wrench it uses, not necessarily the size of the bolt, just so that we don't get, just to kind of help you out to know what tool you need. Because this is technically a 3/8 bolt, but it uses a 9/16 socket or wrench to get it off. Sometimes you can just pull the motor over, get the bolts out. You got one on each side of the head. Okay, now that we got all that extra little brackets off away from the motor, we can start rock and rolling on these rocker boxes. So there's 6 bolts on each box. Just go around and crack them all loose. It doesn't matter where the motor is on the compression stroke or top dead center or whatever, just to get these boxes off. It's once we get these off and we undo the actual rocker arm towers. So we're just gonna crack all these loose, remove these bolts, and get the rocker box valve covers off. Get these off, I just break them loose with an end wrench and use a 7/16 ratcheting wrench to get these off. These bolts do have a 3/16 Allen socket in the top of it, but you're more likely to just round them out. So I just use a wrench to get them off. When you're working on the other side of the rear, it's real tight in there with between the valve cover and the frame. So you can get them out, just be careful not to get your wrench stuck between the bolt and the frame. Yeah, so right here, these bolts, you just want to be careful not to run them out too far with your gear wrench on there, because they'll get stuck between the frame. So just get them out far enough. Pull them out by hand. Now that we've got all the bolts out, what you're going to do, because these rocker boxes, the gaskets kind of glue them together, just take the palm of your hand and just hit it like that, and it'll crack and come right off. Okay, so now we're looking at the rear cylinder. We're going to go ahead and get this rocker tower off, but before we do, we need to get this in the right position. We want to get it on top dead center. So we're going to rotate the motor until we see the intake valve open and then close. Both valves should be closed at that time. So I'm going to go ahead with the bike in high gear, spark plugs out. You could rotate the rear wheel. And you can see here, intake's opening, intake's closing. Then you'll have exhaust open, overlap, intake's opening. So right now, intake is closing. We should be good right there. We could break these loose. So before we break the big bolts loose, you want to go ahead and undo this breather. There are 2 1/4 20 bolts. I use a 3/8 socket to get them off. Go ahead and get those bolts all the way out. Or else if you undo these big tower support bolts, you're going to have these 2 little bolts holding all that pressure. Okay, now that we got our breather bolts out, now we could crack these loose. You just want to break them loose, maybe half a turn each. And loosen them up in like a crisscross pattern. So I'm going to go to the other side. You just want to evenly loosen them so you don't distort the rocker tower. These are just cast aluminum. And again, I'm going to grab my ratcheting wrench, 1/2 inch. Once you have all the pressure off of them, then you could just go ahead and run them all the way out. So there we go. We can see the rocker towers loose. So we could just remove all these bolts. Now that all the bolts are out, we should be able to just lift this up. Sometimes you take these bolts out, pull the rocker box out, or rocker tower out. Right, so we're going to go ahead and repeat the same process for the front. Rotate the motor. So we see that intake valve. The intakes are going to be in the middle, open. and close. Take out the breather bolts and then take out the rocker tower bolts, pull it out. All right, let's go ahead and remove this front rocker tower. Now we need to remove these lower rocker boxes. It's pretty straightforward. There's 6 bolts holding it down, 7/16 socket. All right, same kind of deal with these rockers. We got all the bolts out. You know, if you can't get them loose, little tap of a hammer, come right off. All right, so now we could pull out our push rods. These are going to be 2 different lengths. Your intake is going to be shorter than the exhaust. And then with a hook tool, I just grabbed this clip here. Go to pull those out. And you grab a hold of the bottom tube and give it a little wiggle and a twist while you slide up, depending on how long these have been together. And they should collapse. There we go. So, little twist, wiggle. Go ahead and collapse that. All right, now with a 12-point socket and a long wrench or even like a breaker bar, go ahead and crack these head bolts loose. Start from the inside. Just so you can see, a longer ratchet would be beneficial. This is what we got. Let's do these. And we're going to go to the other side and do the other 4. Once you got all the head bolts broke loose, go ahead and just run them out and remove them. All right, we got all the head bolts out. Now we're ready to go ahead and remove the heads. We did not remove the intake flange bolts because we're going to go ahead and pull the heads off and it'll just slip apart. But if you wanted to, you can get in there with like a ball Allen, 1/4-inch ball Allen, and you take 2 of these on each side. So you got 2 on the right side, and then on the back side by where the head temperature sensor is, there's 2 more Allens there. You get those with like a L wrench. So we're going to go ahead and just separate these right now. So just give these a little, whack like that. See everything loosen up. And you could pull this whole thing off together like this. Just make sure you don't got any connectors caught anywhere. We just take that whole head assembly and we can separate that on the workbench. Makes it a lot easier. Now we got our pistons and cylinders exposed. So go ahead and to remove these, I like to get the piston at the top. Again, you could rotate the motor with the rear wheel, right? And just give these a little whack to break the O-ring. Just wiggle these up. Hold the piston so it doesn't bang against the studs here. Go ahead and get that front piston at the top. Give it a little whack, a little wiggle. All right. And just what I suspected. You can see inside, starting to seize. So you can see right here, this piston skirt. It's pretty shot. That's what's making our noise. Okay, so this is how we have the heads. Came off all together. There's just a little rubber seal in here. So if you just wiggle these guys, see, it'll just come right off. So how I remove these pistons, put a rag down here so the little wrist pin clip doesn't fall down in the case. And then with a pick, there's a little access or relief right here. Just get in there, put your finger over it or else the thing will go shooting across the room. You just get under there, pry it out like that. Get the wrist pin clip out, and then if the pin doesn't come out just by hand, you could take a socket or something and drive it out from the other side. I just take a 7/16 socket with an extension, little hammer, tap it out like that. Don't let your rod slam down on the case there. And go ahead, do the same thing in the front. Put our towel there. Get our pick. Get in that relief. Just kind of work that clip out. Get the wrist pin out. There we go. No bueno. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a feel of these rods, inspect them. I'm going to look at this journal right here where the wrist pin goes. Make sure there's no weird wear, grooves. Take a feel of your rods. They should move easily. They should fall under their own weight. If it's tight, you're going to have some issues, and then you just want to rotate it, check it, different positions of the crank. This crank feels good. No tight spots, no extra loose spots. So this front rod is going to have a little bit of side-to-side movement just because the way that these rods are. It's like you have a C like this. You have the rear rod like that, and then the front rod comes in. So you're going to have a little bit of play on that front one, but you should have no up and down movement. If you pull up and down, that's little minimal. Side to side is fine. Again, just rotate it, check it. Good to go. All right, guys, here's a little extra pro tip. When you're taking a motor apart or anything, it's always a good idea to lay all your stuff out. Try to keep it organized, front and rear, all your bolts, your push rods, whatever. I've been doing this so long, I know exactly where all these bolts go. You can hand me, a bag of bolts and I'll know these are your lower rocker boxes, your upper rocker boxes, breathers, rockers, push rod, all that kind of stuff. So it's just a good idea to stay organized as much as possible, and it minimizes confusion.